General Leron and General Mustin, Ambassador Burns, my wife and I are very pleased to be here today in Berlin and very glad that Germany be the first stop on our 2-week-long visit with our European allies. President Reagan asked me to extend to all Berliners and to all Germans his warm best wishes.
It's the second stop of his planned 13-day tour of West European nations. Major General James G. Boatner, U.S. Commandant of West Berlin, greeted the Vice President as he stepped from the plane. He was also welcomed by Governing Mayor Richard von Weizsäcker.
By entering Berlin, you put your foot on the soil with the deepest roots of American-German friendship. We had the honor of receiving President Reagan a few months ago. It is from Berlin that he proclaimed his Berlin Peace Initiative. We are looking forward that you follow on this work. We are grateful that you did come, and we are sure that all the Berliners and in fact the world will listen what you have to say in the endeavor to keep freedom and peace between East and West. I hope you will have a few glances in order to get your own impression from the viability, the liveliness, and the commitment to freedom of the Berliners, who, together with me, wish you the most hearty welcome.
Traveling with Mr. Bush is his wife Barbara, U.S. Ambassador Arthur Burns, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher. While in West Berlin, the Vice President will consult with NATO allies who are becoming increasingly nervous about U.S. nuclear arms strategy. Here in West Berlin, Mr. Bush will have a first-hand chance to visit the communist-built Berlin Wall and speak with military leaders of the Allied powers. For the Vice President at Tegel Airport, I'm Specialist Peter Dalle reporting for AFN News.
I'm Army Sergeant Monty Jones at the Intercontinental Hotel in West Berlin. The Intercontinental was the second stop on Mr. Bush's first day here in West Berlin. A dinner speech hosted by the governing mayor of West Berlin, Dr. Richard von Weizsäcker. His speech billed as a major policy speech on disarmament.
Berlin has survived violent storms, and throughout, the character and the unbreakable courage of its citizens have inspired lovers of freedom all over the world. For nearly 4 decades now, the people of the Federal Republic of Germany and her allies have worked together with diligence and with passion to see that Berlin survived as a free city. And I spoke a moment ago of the American consciousness of Berlin. Those of us who were alive in 1948 and 1949 recall vividly the struggle for Berlin. The memories of Berliners who lived through the period still evoke feelings which bind us one to the other. There are in Europe about 350,000 American military personnel who, as part of the NATO security forces, provide, in President Reagan's words, the living guarantee of our commitment to the peace and security of Europe. Our security is indivisible from Europe's security. An attack on you is an attack on us. We are always, and especially now, looking for new ways to preserve what we've won over the last 4 decades. And that is why both elements of NATO's decision on INF are inseparable and mutually reinforcing. And by that I mean just this. If we are to be credible in our arms negotiations, the alliance must be united in its determination to deploy the INF systems if necessary. Why? Because otherwise, the Soviet Union will simply have no incentive at all to negotiate seriously. None whatsoever. The United States views its presence in Berlin as an absolutely sacred trust. Our military forces stand ready to defend the western sectors from any threat. And we are totally dedicated to the quadripartite agreement. And we will continue to expect strict observance and full implementation of all its provisions in all sectors of Berlin, east and west. We also support fully the ties between Berlin and the Federal Republic of Germany because they provide the vital foundation for the economic prosperity and for the democracy of the western sectors. And now I'd like to read an open letter from our President. This is an open letter to the people of Europe from President Reagan. American and Soviet officials have just resumed negotiations aimed at reaching an agreement to control intermediate-range nuclear weapons. We have proposed and will continue to urge the Soviets to agree to ban altogether both their intermediate-range land-based nuclear missile weapons and those we intend to deploy in response to their buildup. The Soviet insistence on maintaining a nuclear threat to America's allies while denying them the corresponding means to deter that threat remains the principal obstacle. A way must be found to overcome this obstacle. Just as our allies can count on the United States to defend Europe at all costs, you can count on us to spare no effort to reach a fair and meaningful agreement that will reduce the Soviet nuclear threat. In this spirit, I have asked Vice President Bush, in the city where East meets West, to propose to Soviet General Secretary Andropov that he and I meet wherever and whenever he wants in order to sign an agreement banning U.S. and Soviet intermediate-range land-based nuclear missile weapons from the face of the earth. I make this offer out of a conviction that such an agreement would serve the interests of both sides, and most importantly, that the people of Europe want nothing more. I urge Mr. Andropov to accept it. Signed, Ronald Reagan. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
In his closing remarks, Vice President George Bush said issues facing both sides are very complex. He said the number of weapons on both sides is staggering. He also said the continent has had peace for 38 years, the longest period in this century. And he said if the number of years of peace is to continue and the number of weapons is to decrease, it will be some negotiating very tough on both sides. I'm Army Sergeant Monty Jones at the Intercontinental Hotel in West Berlin.
Army Specialist David Sullivan reporting from Potsdamer Platz, the Berlin Wall in the British sector. The Berlin Wall, when built in 1961, annexed the Soviet sector of Berlin to communist East Germany. The wall would separate communism in the east from freedom in the west, thus serving as a literal and political symbol of democracy. Vice President George Bush, on day 2 of his West Berlin tour, paid a visit to the wall at Potsdamer Platz. In a speech to West German and local politicians Monday night at the Intercontinental Hotel, Mr. Bush called the wall a monument to great evil, but that it also served as a reminder to the great achievements in the maintaining of freedom in West Berlin. The Vice President referred to the alliance on the other side of the wall as an alliance of domination, where the alliance in the West was one of cooperation. At the same time, he reaffirmed President Reagan's defense commitments to West Germany and all of Europe. Mr. Bush's visit to Potsdamer Platz, the wall where East meets West, follows President Reagan's open letter to the people of Europe, which was read by Mr. Bush at the close of his speech on Monday night. The letter was an offer to meet the Soviets anytime, anywhere, and sign an agreement to abolish U.S. and Soviet intermediate-range missiles from the face of the earth. The fact that Vice President George Bush delivered President Reagan's message in Berlin, or at all, is in step with the more active role of the Vice Presidency in the Reagan administration. When the Reagan-Bush team took office in 1980, George Bush took to the administration credentials very impressive in foreign affairs and in national security. He served as CIA director in 1975 and 1976, and as ambassador to the United Nations, and also as a liaison to the People's Republic of China. The next stop on Vice President Bush's Berlin tour is Rathaus Schöneberg.
Vice President George Bush arrived at Schöneberg Rathaus on a rainy Tuesday in West Berlin. While there are many town halls in West Berlin, this one in the Schöneberg district is the town hall in the western sector. One thing that makes Schöneberg City Hall a special Rathaus in West Berlin is the bell that tolls the arrival of high noon every day. The bell is a replica of the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. The copy of the Freedom Bell in the Schöneberg Town Hall is a gift from 17 million Americans. The Freedom Bell has been there since the lifting of the Berlin blockade. The official presentation was made on October 24th, 1950. So Vice President George Bush joins West Berlin Governing Mayor Richard von Weizsäcker here today for a press conference. And what better place in West Berlin for a meeting with journalists from the free world than in the very special town hall where West Berliners, too, can enjoy America's Freedom Bell. I'm Air Force Sergeant Bob Lance.
Army Specialist David Sullivan at the Berlin American Sports Center. Vice President Bush will address the American community. This is his last stop on his West Berlin tour, after which he'll go on to Tegel Airport and then fly on to the Netherlands, his next stop on his European tour.
The Vice President of the United States of America and Mrs. George Bush, and the United States Ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany and Mrs. Arthur Burns, escorted by the United States Commander Berlin and Mrs. Boatner.
Mr. Vice President, the entire Berlin American community joins me in welcoming you and Mrs. Bush to our historic city. I think it's important that you know that the soldiers of the Army Berlin Brigade and the airmen of the Air Force's Tempelhof Central Air Base are highly trained. They're very well disciplined professionals who are outstanding representatives of our country 110 miles behind the Iron Curtain. They, with their colleagues in the State Department, the other American agencies in this city, and our family members, many of whom are here today, All are an important part of the American presence in this part of the world, and all are proud to be serving their country as the defenders of Berlin's freedom. We are all very honored that you and Mrs. Bush have made time to be with us today and to talk to us. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. I did. Thank you, General Bodner. Thank you, General Bodner, for that warm introduction, and thank all of you for that warm introduction. I first want to pay my respects to our very able ambassador, friend of mine of long standing. Like I guess every other American, considers himself a pupil of this ambassador. But we are so lucky, so fortunate as a country to have Arthur Burns be the ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany. And I want to pay my respects to General Bodner and to the officers and men that do protect our freedom here. And I just can't tell you the respect that we have for you and for your mission. I like the music, as a matter of fact. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And for a minute, to the officers and men that do protect our freedom here, and I just can't tell you the respect that we have for you and for your mission. I like the music, as a matter of fact. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And for a minute, I thought they were playing Hail to the Redskins when I walked in, but hey, listen, don't boo me in Berlin. How would you like to be a Cowboy fan in Washington these days? I mean, just a couple of quick words, because it's on my mind. For earlier this morning, I had a surprise. It's not a surprise to any of you kids in school, certainly not a surprise to any of the men and women that serve their country. But it was for me, because it was the first time that I saw that Berlin Wall. And I don't know, I haven't read about it in school like all of you did before you came here, I don't know why it should have surprised me, because I have known about it, and I've thought about it, thought about all that it represents. But finally to see it, and to stand in that shadow, even on a day with no sun, the long shadow that it casts, this city, to see it is to come to face, really, with one of the cruelest existing realities of our time. And I was grateful to turn away from the wall and to know that I'd be coming here to this wonderful spirit that General Bodner has told me about troops here, the brigade here, hear about the civilian contingent here. Know I'd be meeting with you, because really this is a much happier occasion. I bring you best wishes, and I say this to the men and women serving, from the President of the United States. I hope that through our actions and through our words in this administration, you sense the feeling that we have deeply inside it. And that is, we have great respect and admiration for the men and women in the armed forces. For far too long, our country kind of, if not turning our back on those who serve, did not properly appreciate it. And I'm proud here to stand here as Vice President of the United States and say we are grateful from the bottom of our hearts to every single one of you. You are really, and this was brought home to me as I looked across that wall, the dogs and the grayness of it all, on the front line of freedom here. And for the rest of your lives, it seems to me, wherever your adventures take you, Berlin's going to be a part of you. I'm told it's that way for everybody that's been here, in school here or serving here. And I think because of that, you more than most Americans will know how precious freedom really is and what it costs. I wish I could stay here longer, but we do have a long, long way to go before we go home. I wish I could meet each one of you. We're going to try to meet some of you as we walk around this perimeter here, really just to hear from you, your experiences. But let me just say that this mission that the President sent me on is an important mission. It is a mission for peace. We are committed to reducing the terror of nuclear war and conventional force reductions, and indeed conveying to the rest of the world the fact that we are what you know we are. We are a nation of peace. And if we do nothing else but have the opportunity to spread that message to these various capitals in Europe, this trip will be worthwhile. But I'll be carrying back with me when I go back what I feel standing here in front of you in Berlin. And that is a deep appreciation, and it's also this love of my own country. You know, I think sometimes we take for granted the United States and what we stand for and our role in history and what we think we've done to preserve the peace. But if I ever was tempted to do that before, having visited the Berlin Wall, having seen you men and women here today, and having had a chance to get that infectious enthusiasm from the kids when I drove up, I'll never in my life ever again take freedom for granted. Thank you ever so much.
Roger, the Vice President has just concluded his remarks to the Berlin American community. And let me just hold on to something that the Vice President said in closing. The people who serve here in Berlin, the people who go to school here in Berlin are holding on to something very precious, and that's freedom. We'll never forget that. And now some final remarks from Major General Boatner.
I didn't think they were going to give me a chance to thank you, Mr. Vice President. Speaking for everybody here and for the many people who would have liked to have come had we had a bigger facility, we very much appreciate your remarks, and I think particularly the obvious sincerity. And we know that you have a very important job on this trip. We know it's going to be long and difficult, so from all of the Americans in Berlin, we certainly wish you good luck and Godspeed.
Pure pandemonium here in the Berlin Brigade Sports Center. Vice President George Bush has just concluded his remarks to the Berlin American community. About 2,000 people here, banners and flags line the walls welcoming the Vice President.